Hey there, grace and peace to you all today. Welcome to the Shield Online, our weekly examination of Scripture where we look at what it meant, what it means today, and how it might be useful to us in the now. I am Captain Roger McCourt from the Salvation Army's Hanford Corps, and I am happy that you have joined us today. We are starting a new story. Long ago, there was a man named Elijah who was called a prophet. But we should start by defining that word because it's one that causes a lot of confusion. To be a prophet simply means that someone spoke what God told them to. It had nothing to do with predicting the future, even though there were some prophets who did that kind of thing. It was just about being someone chosen to speak for God. Sometimes God saw fit to give them special powers or to protect them in miraculous ways. But for the most part, prophets were just folks chosen to speak to certain groups of people at certain times. They came from all walks of life. Moses was a wanted murderer who'd been hiding, working as a shepherd for 40 years before a burning bush spoke to him. Amos was a migrant farm worker. Ezekiel was a priest, as was Jeremiah. Daniel was a member of Judah's royal family, taken captive and castrated at a young age and then trained to serve in the Babylonian court. And Elijah, we have no idea. He was just a guy from an insignificant town in the middle of a small stretch of hills east of the Jordan River called Gilead. Now, while we may not know more about where he was called from, we do know a lot about why. Solomon's son was the last king to rule over a united Israel, but he was an idiot who offended so many people that his kingdom fractured into two parts, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. But the temple of God was in Jerusalem in Judah, so the kings in northern Israel largely decided to do their own thing religiously, worshiping other gods and living as if the Lord wasn't important. By and large, this worked out poorly for them, and their country's reliance on military might would become their downfall. God sent several prophets to warn them of what was coming, but the nation ignored them and embraced their warlike ways until the Assyrians came along and destroyed them completely. Elijah was the first of the prophets who tried to steer the people away from the disaster they would eventually choose to embrace. Omri was a political and military-minded leader who took over the northern kingdom along the way. He was like the fifth or sixth king, I think, of northern Israel there. He defeated his rivals. He solidified a dynasty which would last for generations. And while he was king, he built a fortified city in the middle of Israel, which he named Samaria, meaning protected. And he made it into the capital. He also made worship a top priority. Unfortunately, it was the worship of two golden calf statues that had been set up by an earlier king. And he combined that with the worship of some of the Canaanite gods. Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him, or so it says in Scripture. Now, when he died, Omri's son Ahab surpassed him, both in achievements and in evil. In Samaria, Ahab built a temple for Baal, the storm god, and he set up an Asherah pole celebrating that fertility goddess as well. And then he commissioned Hiel from Bethel to rebuild the ancient city of Jericho, which had been destroyed when Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land. In the old ways, people believed that building cities disturbed the spirits of the land, and the spirits then would destabilize construction, even undoing work that had been completed, and would possess the buildings to drive out human inhabitants. So to prevent this, the spirits needed to be appeased with a sacrifice. Now, you may be thinking this is obviously a silly and ancient superstition that no one could possibly believe in today. Yeah, sure. Have you ever seen a cornerstone on a building or a capstone on an arch? Yeah, those are part of this tradition of sacrificing to the spirits. These days, we scribe memorials on the surface, or we put time capsules or mementos inside the concrete. In those days, it was often animals or their bones that were put in there, but sometimes, and in fact this was before the animals and more common than the animals for quite a while, it was human beings. And those humans needed to be the builders who were offending the spirits, or a close relative of the builders that's given to take their place. Hiel put his firstborn son into the foundation that the city was laid on, and his youngest son into the massive city gate. Ahab approved and celebrated. God mourned. Seeking to turn his people from this path towards destruction that they were on, the Lord sent Elijah to Ahab with a message. As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. At first, Ahab laughed at this. The idea that a man, any man, could just turn off the rain was ridiculous. But as days stretched into weeks without, the laughter tapered off. And after a few months, Ahab was ready to kill Elijah. Perhaps if Yahweh's prophet was sacrificed to Baal, the storm god would see fit to send rain. But the Lord had sent Elijah into the wilderness to hide. This is where we meet Elijah from Tishbe, living in a ravine in the hill country of Gilead near a small desert stream. He is alone, and there is no food, but he knows that God is with him and that the Lord provides. Each morning as the sun rises, a handful of reddish-black ravens fly into where he is camped. He suspects they come to drink from the stream, but they bring gifts with them when they come, bread and meat clutched in talons or beak, small offerings made to Elijah before the majestic birds bob off to the water's edge, filling themselves before they launch back into the warming desert sun. Elijah is grateful. The ravens bring all that he could eat and more, not just in the morning, but every evening as well, shortly before the sun dips over the horizon. Bread and meat. He eats better than many people in Israel, he knows. Most are content with bread and get meat only on occasion. He is living the life of a king. 2 feasts each day and a stream of cool, fresh water for him to drink from. God provides for those who trust. And still, it did not rain. There wasn't even enough moisture in the air for dew to form. The land got drier, and Elijah knew that crops were beginning to fail, and that the catch basins used for livestock would be emptying if they hadn't already. These are the carved basins out in the desert that would catch water during the rainy season and hold it there so that there would be places to water your animals around the calendar, right? No matter what season it was. Elijah knew, too, that the little wadi that sustained him would be trickling to an end soon, and this stream only ran for a few months during the wettest of seasons. And one morning he woke to find that the water was gone, and after they had discovered the stream was gone, the ravens and their offerings were gone, too. But God spoke to Elijah, telling him to head northwest up and out of Israel to the town of Zarephath, on the coast near Sidon. A woman there would give him food. God provides, Elijah thought, and he went. And it was 100 miles. It's a long walk from Gilead. And it took about a week for the prophet to arrive, and the last of his food from the ravens was consumed as he traveled along the final drops of water from the skin that he carried. And as he reached the town that he had been told to go to, there was a woman at the gate tying up a bundle of sticks, and her clothing suggested she was a widow, and Elijah thought, perhaps this is the one God told me about. So he asked her if she could bring him a jar of water. And as she was going to get it, he added, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. Her response surprised him. She laughed bitterly and swore by the name of Israel's God that she didn't have any bread. We have only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. Well, Elijah was moved by her plight, and who wouldn't be? With no rain, crops had failed across the region. Even here, outside of Israel, the consequences of Ahab's sin had robbed this woman of what hope she had left. But our God provides. So Elijah fixed her with this calm gaze and told her not to be afraid. He said, go home, make bread just as you planned to do, but before you do, make a small loaf for me and bring it to me. Then go home and make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. It was a risk. I mean, she knew of Israel's God. Obviously, she was swearing by his name. But they were not in Israel. And in the theology of the time, people thought that gods only had power in their home country and not outside of it. Would she trust this outsider and his God to keep an impossible promise for her? Or was he just trying to trick her into giving up what little she had left? And as a widow, she certainly had no power to accuse him if he was doing that. Of course, if he was lying, it was really only hastening her death and that of her son by just a few hours. And if he was telling the truth and his God could provide this miracle for them, then they might live until the rain came, and perhaps they would find a way to go on. So she did as Elijah told her. Pouring a small handful of water into her cookpot, she heated it to a boil, took it from the fire, then added a handful of flour and a splash of oil and stirred them together into a small ball of warm crumbs. And kneading them together right there in the pot, she pressed it together into a ball and threw a cloth over it for just a few minutes while she eyed the jar of flour suspiciously. I mean, there hadn't been much in it before, and now, well, there still wasn't much. She pinched some up and put it on the counter, and then flattened the dough glob out onto that that smattering of flour, and flattened the dough out into one small round loaf while her cook pan heated back up. Then she tossed it into the hot pan, swirling it slightly to keep it from sticking, until small bubbles began to form at the top edge, and then she flipped it over. The underside had browned nicely, and in less than a minute the other side was done too. She brought this small loaf out to Elijah, who thanked her and sent her back to make loaves for her son and herself, which she did. Surely there wouldn't be enough flour for 2 more rounds, even as small as she was making them, but there was, and when she had made them, the little jar still had a handful of flour, and the oil jug looked to be at about the same level as it had been at before. The God of Elijah provided. Every day, with great amazement and deepening gratitude, she would make bread for the prophet and then make enough for her family to eat as well. And every day the jar held a handful of flour and the jug held a layer of oil, just as she had been promised. Now in those days, peasant homes had a large main room and a small loft area above them, and this upper room was reserved for guests, as hospitality was and is of vital importance in their culture. In awe of the prophet and his God, the widow offered him a place in her guest room, and he accepted for several months, as it turned out. The drought continued. No rain meant little or no crops. God continued to provide for the household with bread, but the world around them was hungrier, and food was growing scarcer, and people were weaker. Even mild deprivation from nutrients can weaken a body's immune response, and so it is that famine is often followed or accompanied by disease. Elijah's world was no different than the one we live in. It's just an earlier time. Illness spread across the land. The most vulnerable to this kind of wasting away are the elderly, but young people whose bodies are either not fully formed or whose immunities have not been trained by years of testing like an adult's, they're also susceptible. And so it was that the widow's son fell ill and was ravaged by a sickness that lasted for days before his body could take no more. One day his labored breathing eased, then slowed, and finally stopped altogether. The cry of pain from his mother when she realized he was dead was heart-rending. Elijah ran to see what had happened, and he found her cradling her son's lifeless form, just rocking back and forth slowly, as if she could somehow impart movement back into the stillness that had taken him. "Is this because of you?" she cried at the prophet. "I know that I'm not perfect. I've done wrong in my life. I am a sinner. Is your God punishing me by taking away my son?" Elijah was silent for a long moment, grieving for her loss, grieving for her son, grieving for himself. He cared for the young man and had relished seeing life flourishing even in the difficult times that they were all living through, and he felt something else, something unexpected inside of him. Anger. "Give me your son," Elijah replied, and he took him from her arms and he carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and he laid him on his bed. He hadn't thought she would let go of the boy even after he had him in his arms, but she did, and while he climbed those steps, she shrank into a heap, just sobbing silently as he took away what remained of her only child. Upstairs, Elijah looked at the small shape laid out on his bed. Once life is left, everyone looks less, somehow. And that anger rose up in his chest and he erupted out through his mouth as he cried out to the Lord, "Yahweh, my God, why? Have you brought deeper tragedy to this house, on this widow I'm staying with? Did you cause her son to die?" And he threw himself on top of the boy in a flurry of frustration. And then he got back to his feet and he did it again, as if he could somehow cause his own spirit to leap into the dead child, which he couldn't. He pulled himself up again, tired and angry and wishing that things could be different, knowing that they couldn't, and then in anguish he threw himself back down on the boy one last time, praying, no pleading, no crying out to the Lord, "Yahweh, my God, let this boy's life return to him." And he lay there, feeling his heart beating against that small body, feeling his breath moving in and out the way the boys had done before while he was alive. He would have to go out and find someone to come and prepare the body for burial. And he began to stand up when he heard the sound. Was that... What was it? A breath? He looked back at the boy, knowing that it couldn't be, knowing that he was hearing things, when he saw the chest rise and fall, and rise and fall again. Long, smooth breaths beginning their cycle of giving life to the widow's son again. He was breathing. He was alive. God had heard Elijah's prayer and had provided life for the lifeless. Elijah was stunned and overjoyed and joyful and overcome all at once. He didn't know what to do, so he swept up the living and breathing and probably very confused boy into his arms, and he carried him down into the main room, and getting the attention of the widow, he handed her child back to her, calling out as he did so, "Look, your son is alive." And from that moment on, she knew that what the Lord promised could always be relied on. She knew that Elijah was God's prophet, and that any message the Lord gave through him was the truth. And she knew beyond any doubt that God provides. God provided life for her son. God provided food for her family. God had provided for Elijah in the wilderness, and God had provided Elijah for Ahab and for Israel to point them back to the path of righteousness that could lead them to new life of their own. As we will see, going over the story of Elijah in the coming weeks, some will choose to take it and some will not. How about you? If God provides the way that we're told, what will you choose to do with that information? Will you choose to believe in it and trust in it and act on it? Or will you question it, ignore it, believe in other powers like riches or military strength or idols instead of the Lord God who created you and loves you and wants the best for you in all things? Because God provides. I urge you to put your trust in God. I'm going to wrap up there, but I want you to know something. Whoever you are, wherever you are, God is with you. You can't get yourself to any place or any situation or circumstance that God is not already there. What you need to do is turn and go with God. Grace and peace to each and every one of you in the coming week. We'll see you next time.